Good afternoon and welcome to the Networks of Opportunity for Child Wellbeing monthly webinar. This month's episode focuses on fostering thriving cities, and so partnerships between city and community partners for early childhood success. So welcome. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Rhonda Alexander, and I'm coming to you from the Vital Village Network here in Boston, Massachusetts. So as we get started, I just want to share a few tips and a couple of reminders, and then we'll go ahead and get started because our guests today have lots of information to share with you. So if you haven't already noticed, when you come into the webinar, your microphones will be muted. So if you have questions or you have an issue or anything that comes up, please use the chat box. You can find that on your navigation pane. It's probably the last item there. And you can also submit questions through our dashboard, which you'll find on that navigation pane as well. We will be recording this episode or this particular webinar, and slides will be posted following. Again, here's a brief overview or just a quick look at where you can submit questions or comments, and we will be keeping an eye on the chat box throughout today's conversation. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of what we'll be doing for the next hour, I'll share a little bit more about the Vital Village Network and the Networks of Opportunity for Child Wellbeing. We'll share a little bit about the National League of Cities, and then you'll hear from our speakers today, which I'll tell you a little bit about when we get a little closer. And then we'll have about 15 minutes or so for questions towards the end, but you can type questions throughout the conversation as they come up, and we'll do our best to get to as many of those questions as we can, and then we'll be sure to get you out of here right at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. So just a little bit more about the Vital Village Network. We are committed to maximizing child, family, and community well-being. Since 2010, Vital Village has been working and fostering partnerships between residents and organizations really designed to help support young children and families. And some of the things we focus on or that are really important to us is the idea of service learning and community leadership. We try to do all of our work through a trauma-informed lens, and we're really working on an iterative cycle of improvement and sharing data and stories in a variety of ways on a variety of platforms. And so this work is going on here in Boston, and we're really excited about it. And so I hope that anyone who's listening from the Vital Village Network here in Boston, we're so glad to have you. A little bit more about the Networks of Opportunity for Child Wellbeing, or NOW. It's a national initiative led by the Vital Village Network, and we are working with a number of communities across the country to really build and increase their capacity to advance health equity and child wellbeing, specifically health and educational equity for children. And we also manage in the NOW Innovation resource of tools, articles, blogs. It's a place to share stories and really promote child well-being across a network of communities. It's open to anybody in the world, so we hope that you'll join us there. And that's also where you can find a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as our new podcast, which is now live on all platforms, called In the Arena with Now. Just a little bit more about the learning community. We're working with 10 communities across the country over an 18-month period to really help build their capacity. So you see we're touching every corner of the country. So for any members of the Now Learning community who are here, welcome, and thank you for representing the learning community today. And again, here's a little bit more information about the Now Innovation Forum. Please check it out. You can hear stories, articles, blogs, resources, and any recordings that we have will be found here. So again, as I said before, my name is Rhonda Alexander, and I'm the Director of Operations for the Vital Village Network, and particularly on the Networks of Opportunity for Child Wellbeing. I'd also like to share a little bit more about our partners today from the National League of Cities. Nancy Zuick-Lim is a program manager for the National League of Cities and works on connecting city leaders and manages and leads a variety of implementation efforts and grants to provide support to the program director. And Tanja Rucker serves as the program director for the Early Childhood Success in the Institute for Youth and Families at the National League of Cities, and she's responsible for developing and overseeing the implementation of the Institute's work and oversees a variety of strategies. So we are so excited to welcome them to the Vital Village Network and the Networks of Opportunities for Child Wellbeing to share a little bit more about their experiences and some of the great resources and tools around connecting cities and municipal initiatives with what's happening with local communities for early childhood. So thank you all so much for being here, and they're going to take it away. So they'll have about 20 minutes or so, and then we'll come back with questions. So we look forward to hearing from you all.
Thank you, Wanda. So nice to meet you, see you virtually for the first time, but certainly not the first that I've heard of the wonderful work that you're leading there at Vital Village. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. I just want to thank Dr. Renee Borton-Jarrett for this amazing opportunity to partner with Vital Village. We at the National League of Cities are so grateful for this partnership, and we're excited about the work that you guys and your amazing team is leading across the nation. So thank you for having us this afternoon, and we hope that the following couple of minutes will be informative and that will spark some innovative thinking around the work that you're doing and city leadership.
Great, yes, and I echo Tanja's gratitude for being here today. We're so excited. And today we're going to talk a little bit, we'll let you know a little bit for those of you who aren't familiar with us, know who the National League of Cities is, our NLC as we'll refer to ourselves. We'll talk about partnerships and how critical they are to success in the early learning arena and for well-being, and talk about what we're learning from cities and what cities are doing and how they're supporting young children and families. And most importantly, we'll talk about families as partners. First, I want to get started. And the National League of Cities, we've been around for probably about 100 years now. We are the oldest and largest membership organizations of cities, towns, and villages across the United States. This is numbers about 19,000. So rather than saying cities, towns, and villages every time we talk about an example or ourselves, we're just going to use cities because it's part of our name. So, and what we do as a large organization is provide resources and advocate for those things that matter most to city leaders and cities themselves, and having spaces and places that are thriving and supportive. Tanja and I both, along with a bunch of other colleagues, work within a special entity called the Institute for Youth Education and Families. And this institute, we're about to celebrate our 20th year, yay! And we've been working with elected officials to so they can take action on behalf of just that youth education and families. And there's 5 different focus areas within that, and Tanja and I are within that area that's focused on early childhood, so that prenatal to age 8 span. What we do within early child team, our vision as a team, which is 6 of us, is that every city, town, and village across the country is a place where all the children that are there, 0 to 8 years old, reach their full potential, and where their families feel supported and all can live safe and healthy lives. So we're covering that entire age span, giving them tools and guidance and resources to build those strong early learning systems. And so we're going to go back just once. And okay, a little technical difficulty there. So how we do that is we have 3 different ways if you look at our work broadly. We have what everyone calls our frameworks, and these are really from our work looking at how can city leaders and their community partners, what are entry points for working in and building strong systems. And we have a number of those. We use these tools to ground our technical assistance initiatives, and currently we have 5 initiatives going on at this time across that whole age span, and some of them focused on discrete areas of the system like infant and toddler care and also the early childhood workforce. One of our secret sauces is really building those peer networks for city leaders and their community partners and creating that space and time for them to do that work and supporting them. And as you can see, currently we have we're really blessed and privileged to be working with deeply with cities and their community leaders for the past 20 years. And currently we're working with 50 cities actively. And this helps us reach 2 million children across the country from ages 0 to age 8. So that's who we are and what we do. So on to partnerships and why we feel like this is such a critical piece. So Tanja, you lead our work here. We're so grateful to have you. And we've had that privilege of working so deeply with cities where we really get to know them, we get to know their community partners, and we see that, to build those strong, equitable, early learning systems where everyone's supported, children are supported, they're thriving, it works. You just know it. What does it take? Right, we've been doing case studies, we've been doing initiatives. If you look across all take,
there's a number of ways I could respond to that, and I thought a little bit about it this morning, Nancy. And I think one of the key elements to, a thriving city is certainly at multiple levels, but certainly within city government, there's a need to have leaders that are forward thinking and really leaning into innovation and open to ideas. And really, for our members here at NLC, it's the nuts and bolts of city. How does a city function and thrive? And we get into things like infrastructure and roads and those things that are the mechanics of city government. And those things are very important. But we have learned over the years and through our work with cities that an equally important ingredient is for leaders to really value and recognize the importance of human capital and really acknowledging and recognizing that if a city is going to thrive, that we need all families and all kids to thrive and do well. And so having leaders that are forward thinking and can think beyond just the nuts and bolts of city government and how those human services are vital to the success. So I think leaders that have a vision, it doesn't hurt, when an elected official actually has a young child. We have, worked in a number of cities and those mayors or city managers are, they have a 3-year-old and they get it. But even if you don't have kids, I think having a vision for families and the kind of legacy that leaders, I think we help them think about their legacy. Our elected officials are oftentimes term limited. And so they have a set period of time where they can really set an agenda. And so I would say leadership, vision, and really valuing human capital, having those kind of leaders in government and across your city is really important. And you can feel it when there are leaders that are kind of tuned into those 3 buckets.
So we've done some work really digging into, why leaders are so important in partnerships, and typically we always start there with our projects. But there are a couple elements when you're aligning and bringing together all these community, not just city leaders, but all the city leaders, right? Community partners, parents, all of that. And we've come to 8 critical elements of alignment. Can you talk a little bit about, this is deep work that's been brewing and kind of summarizing and that of 8 of the 20 years of work. Can you talk a little bit about, while we're focusing today on partnerships, how all of this, it's not just a good partnership, but without these, you really need to look across?
Yeah, I think we've seen an evolution. I've been here 10 years, and so I've seen an evolution of how leaders think about work. And I think there is a recognition that, city government can't do it alone. And oftentimes, you can't operate on an island, and it's not always prudent that the city hall leads the effort. I think there's a recognition that sometimes that's appropriate, but other times it's partnering and co-designing and co-partnering with your stakeholders across the city. And so this multi-sector partnership is so crucial. I think we've seen an evolution in the reaching out across to various sectors that are not traditionally part of the early learning conversation. I think casting that wide net as we've got there on the slide. But I also think that, connecting the work of early learning and the vibrancy of kids to larger city agendas. And so that can be done in tandem with various stakeholders and aligning the priorities of a mayor or council or city manager with what's happening in the community. And I think there is a recognition by cities that there's a lot going on in their communities that they don't know. And so I think there is more intentionality from City Hall to learn more about what's happening at the neighborhood level or at the council district level, and how does that feed up into a citywide vision for kids and families that's inclusive, that's in real time meeting the needs of families. And so I think our framework really kind of helps set the table, but you need data to kind of, if you're going to convince City Hall to think and really invest, you need data, and they need where are we, and having some great data points, and also having the voice of families inform the work is just really key. And so those are just a couple of elements of what it takes. And I think we're seeing an evolution of this progress, but we're not there yet. So that's why we're here, is still at the table doing what we do every day to kind of get them there.
Yeah, great. So you brought about a lot of the things of those transformational partnerships, right? And we really see those cities that got it with partnerships, and where the city leadership and the community, those things that really, that secret sauce that makes it click, those are the cities that are making progress, right? It is one of the keys. And you touched on the casting a wide net, the attention to communication and advocacy, and the deepening the long commitment. One of the things that we see in our work, and because our partners, the groups that we work with are really city teams, right? They're city leaders, because we always have the buy-in from the mayor's office, but we also, at the table with them, are a lot of times community partners.
Yes.
And we've had community partners call us on the phone, how do I get my city leader? And so one of the things is, why is it so important? We're looking here, like the critical infrastructure, and we always talk about early childhood as critical infrastructure. Why is it important that the city's at the table, and that we're inviting the city into the table when we're wanting to improve early childhood issues? So if I'm a community organization and I'm a service provider, why do I want to be engaged with my city?
Sure. Well, I'll answer that. But first, I just want you guys to know, on the who's dialed in today, that we are such advocates of not recreating the wheel, and really pushing our elected officials. You come into office and you don't have to start everything new. Like, the world didn't begin when you came into office. And we often press our leaders and really challenge them to find out, like, who at the neighborhood level, this work is being done. People have been at the table for a while. So we push them to really think more broadly and strategically, and the value in community and local leadership by district or neighborhood. So we do that. So we're doing that for all of you guys. And but I want you to think strategically about, your work. And as we talk often, Nancy, about like sustainability, how do we to keep our work ongoing? And certainly one of the main questions is like funding. Like, how do we keep the work financed? And part of that is, if your work is disconnected from the larger agenda in your city, I just think that's a missed opportunity. I think we're not asking you to redo or recreate, but I think it's important that as you've got your roots in the community and you're doing great work, it's on you a little bit to take a look at those larger agenda and priorities of your elected officials and find yourself in that. And I think that's a key to your sustainability. That's a key to your longevity. And it's also key just to financing. And you may find partners and support that you never thought, imaginable. And I just think it's both ways. We can't have cities just creating new stuff without, first exploring what's already being done. But I do think it's on some of our community partners too to say, let me call Nancy and what do you think? Like, how should we approach a particular city, or what's the history there? And what's the best way to kind of get our program elevated? And I think when you can connect that to the larger vision of the city, and we're also seeing trends of like regional impact. Like, there's cities that are coming together like for regional impact. And if you can find, and if your work is going to help reach some of those goals or help families, then you're part of that story, and it's important that you kind of make your connection points.
Great, thank you. So one of the things we want to get into, that was, I think you pulled out a lot of the salient points and things that we're communicating to every city or community leader that we're working with. One of the things, though, is that we really talked about, right, it's been, okay, that's great, but then I'm back at my desk.
Right.
And I'm really trying to do that work. So I want to talk about some city examples. And the one of the cities that comes up, especially for partnerships, right? Our go-to city.
Yeah, this is the go-to. This is the one.
This is like Fort Worth is our go-to city for partnerships. How did they do it? Because it wasn't always, they had their spits and spurts of trying to do early childhood, and then it just clicked.
Yeah.
And man, did they take off.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about Fort Worth?
Yeah. There is something about, like, sometimes it's just the timing of everything falls into place. But as I think back on Fort Worth, it goes back to my first comment around leadership, and it wasn't the mayor. And I hope nobody from Fort Worth is on. Like, let me be careful how I frame this, but
Mayor Price is a great supporter, but it didn't start there. She led her full support when it was brought to her attention, but it was grassroots.
She had her priorities, but every mayor will say they love kids and they support kids, and they do. It's just finding your way into that space. Mm-hmm. And that's what I think the folks at Fort Worth did. And it was one particular leader, and I got to give a shout out to the libraries, because she was very much working in the library, and she was just a connector, and she had a vision about how to, like there were great things happening in the city, but everybody was operating in their silos. So I think having someone to kind of take it up to the mayor. This person had, credibility, because she was just a hard worker, had been with the city for a while. But I think she brought it to Mayor Price. There was an entry point. Mayor Price was big on after school, and so there's, hey, that's early childhood well-being and health. And so there were some ways to really kind of just gingerly start infusing young kids into that agenda. And I think what they did that was so smart is that they brought in a regional funder as a thought partner. They did not ask for money. They said, we want your brains, and we want you to be a co-designer of how do we, because we're in Texas, we're in a place where business is very valued, and so we need a really great way to organize ourselves. And so organizing themselves, the partnerships strategically, it was just a great success. And we could unpack that a little bit more, but and I think we have a case study of how they did some of this.
We do. It's in our alignment framework, so you can look at that.
Yeah, you've got to organize. You've got to organize yourself, because other sectors look to early childhood and they say these are the most disorganized folks that just don't have it together. And I think if you find a way to bring the partners together, city may lead, the city may not lead, but you find your space amongst a group of partners, you organize yourself around a common goal, and they did that, and it was just very successful.
Yeah, so I want to talk about mayors, examples of mayors leading the work. Yeah. Hartford is a great example where he was the convener and then off they went. Can you, in a couple of sentences, tell us about how they brought together the curriculum?
Yeah, so here the mayor was, Fort Worth, the mayor got on board. Here, we've always had mayors in certain cities that are just always early childhood is a priority. So I think, he commissioned the school district, the city, and I think local United Way, and just said, and gave some city staff time to be at the table to really kind of help those three major players, who then brought in other partners, and they put city dollars, some city funding into the work. And it was part of the mayor's his blueprint, his agenda, and every speech, they made sure that kids were part of all of the elected officials. They always would say something about kids and families. And so it's giving them the data and the talking points. And as a mayor, he just used that. But bringing those, first, the big stakeholders in your community, getting them at the table, giving them a little bit of resources, and then getting some of those other partners. And it's been probably one of the cities where we always have really good municipal leadership around kids.
So, and then another exciting place is Longmont. We actually just talked with them yesterday, and they've been a partner for a long time. I think the interesting part of their story is that they started with community providers coming together and approaching, I think it was the public health department.
Yep.
And they created Bright Eyes. And now today, like after all those years, on the call yesterday, they said all 7 of their council members have selected and are on board for early childhood being one of their number 1 priorities. Isn't that amazing?
Which has not been the case, but they've evolved, and I think the providers there really kind of drove like those, and they were not all child care centers. They were family-based. Mm-hmm. Some of the folks like home-based child care, and they really were the drivers and right. came out and really helped move some of the work there. So your champions can be at many different points of entry.
Right. And one of the things with the Now communities, they're not necessarily cities, they're regions, they're counties, and all of that. One of the things about the mayor in Rochester is early childhood was really an important thing. And one of her initiatives was wanting newborn parents to know the 5 things that they could do with their children, congratulating them. And because she couldn't just do it in her city, she partnered with Monroe County. And every parent in Monroe County got a personal letter from her when they went home after having a child. But she's been a great supporter of infant and toddler.
What's notable about her is that her county, she's surrounded by a county that's very red and very conservative. And so, but there is ways, I think this is an issue, young kids is bipartisan. It doesn't, I think the data and the research and the science really lends itself to support across the aisle. So whether you are from a blue district or a red district, and reaching out to your counterparts with data, and that's what she did. And she also used the high school graduation rate as a driver because it was dismal, like in terms of for students of color. And so she used that as the long term, like we've got to get there. And so she used that high school dropout rate as and backtrack to early childhood as like we've got to start early. And she reached out across. So I just don't want you guys, if you live in a place where it may seem hard, this is one of the issues, and we have data here, and if you need like talking points across the aisle politically, it's been found that this is just bipartisan across the board. And some of your advocates can be very conservative, but early childhood is top of their agenda as well.
Right, like Louisville and Fort Worth, again, Republican mayors. Okay. Economic development was the driver to doing early childhood. And so, we're seeing a lot of reasons and a lot of that early childhood is so top of mind. So families are important. Let's talk about families. And there are multiple ways, like family engagement. Thank you, Barry. It builds, family engagement can happen in a lot of ways, right? It's giving information to families, it's providing services and supports, it's whether we're the city or the community building programs that serve, and then engagement in civic engagement, whether it's civic engagement in how services are designed, civic engagement of our leaders, civic engagement of our governments. And the reality is we talk about family engagement like families are here and then everybody else is here. But everyone here is a family. Right? Everyone's a family. Families are present in, mayors have children, providers of daycares have children. So I think one of the disconnects is that we think of them as something else. But there's a lot of different ways that we connect with families. What are you seeing? I mean, we work with a lot of partners, too, that are really working to build reaching out to families and helping them build their capacity to be involved in civic engagement, and in particular involved in government, like in how we decide the rules and the laws. Can you talk about a couple of the partners and highlight a little bit their programs?
Sure. So I think with family engagement, we've also seen an evolution of how cities think about families. And like you said, everybody who works in city government is a parent, but it's like we're not parents. Parents are out here, but it really is weird. It's how, when we've helped them think strategically about, authentic, you hear the term authentic family engagement. What does that really look like? And so, but I do think there is a place that cities do see themselves as providing services, trainings, and supports. And there's a place for that. That's very important as well. But our goal here, certainly at NLC, Nancy, is to help cities think about parents as like co-designers of how our city functions and how it does business. And so that's we're not there yet, but we're helping city leaders think about in real time the policies and practices that's coming out of City Hall. It should be informed and really designed by the families that are being served, so that you're really meeting families where they are. And we've tapped different partners across the nation to kind of help us. It's not our primary function, so we need the content expertise of partners such as Parent Leadership Training Institute, which has been a part of NLC since I came aboard. And then there's the folks at Kofi out of Chicago and those are two different, I think the keys to both of those organizations, and I think why we have such good synergy is that there is a democracy piece of it. It's like you provide and equip parents and build up their infrastructure, and then they go do something. And part of that doing is become active in their democracy, in their government, and how you should take that and be a voice and make change, right? And that be those change agents. And so what does that look like in city government? What does that look like in your community? And so that's the next level, and how we're trying, and our partners at Kofi and PLTI really kind of help. And there's deep training. I really admire Kofi. I mean, they started out in Chicago and in neighborhoods that are very distressed, and not being afraid of going in the hard places. And I think both of these models, are tackling parts of the city that may be forgotten. And there's so much human capital in those communities, in those neighborhoods, and building up that capacity. And once parents are built or they have the skills and assets that they need, then how do they be the change levers for government and make changes that are really systemic, and make those changes so that parents are better off and families are better off. And so those are really good partners for us. And there's others out there, but I think it's the democracy piece. And certainly with, the elections, and there's so much energy nationally around, thinking about voting and having your voice in terms of who we elect in our public offices. I think it's a great opportunity now to really look to parents and folks in neighborhoods and help and build that capacity and inform. And so that's kind of what we're hoping to do with partners as Parent Leadership Training Institute and Kofi.
Great. I want to talk about city leaders and what they're doing within reaching out to parents as partners, and also a lot of our parents, grandparents, families are providers themselves, are early care providers, whether it's informal in friend, family, and neighbor care, or whether it's formal in their own business that they're doing, where they have children in, or parents that are taking in other children as their small business. So the one that comes top of mind is Jacksonville, Florida, and they are doing PLTI. But one of the things, and quickly, because I know we're going to run out of time, but they started as a literacy team, and then they are full-fledged supporting providers. Can you talk a little bit about how they got to their coaching model and highlight how they're doing that?
Yeah, I think they are probably one of the cities that I look to, because they found an entry point for a mayor who was also a Republican mayor in literacy and books. And that's something I think everybody can get behind. And so they started where they could and developed a very sophisticated book club where they actually got to the point where they were actually writing in-house their own books that were featuring the city of Jacksonville. And they had local artists and writers write the books. And so every month there was a new book about the city of Jacksonville, and it was in the light. I mean, really, it's just how they grew a reading and list initiative into a book initiative, into a book club, where the mayor was actually a character on a Saturday's, PBS show. And so it's just, I think we all need to think about, you start small and you build and you get those partners. But then they realized that the providers oftentimes didn't have the literacy levels to coach and to be a good teacher to the kids. And so they were like, oh, wait a minute, we've got books, but our providers need training and development. And so the city took on a role of coaching providers, and this coaching program has been in play for a number of years now. And so they go into home-based centers and center-based, and the city has dollars, quite a bit of their general fund dollars, and they have a coach, and the coach is set at city government, and they go in and they do the coaching, and it has improved the quality of the centers and the outcomes. And once again, data has been the kind of the key driver to kind of build the mayors. They've been through several mayors at this point, but it really has made the case for itself. And they have been so good with their data that like the after school work and this is the case in a number of cities. Like the early childhood folks have been tracking and so other systems are beginning to say, well, we need to do the same thing, and they've just been very good at that, Nancy.
Right. So supporting parents and partnering with them to improve the quality of the early care and education, we've seen many cities, San Francisco being one of them, really take up, they were one of our faculty cities in our workforce initiative of cities supporting the workforce. And we've spent 2 years, we're writing up those results of, what is the city's role in supporting the workforce and what can you do? What are some of those different levers you're seeing cities step up and say, here's how we can support the workforce to help families? And what are they doing?
Yeah, this is the area for folks on the call where I see the most momentum and energy. We have, for a number of years, been focusing on the kids and to some degree parents, very little on the early childhood workforce. And so I think a lot of focus on, at the city level is seeing some of the family child care providers as businesses. That's been a eye-opening revelation for them. But these are businesses, and we can support them in their functional of just being shared services model, like in terms of how do you do your billing and your licensing. And so there's things that the city can do to kind of help you with the mechanics of operating and being a successful business. But I think larger, Jacksonville has been a model for like coaching. Like not everybody wants a BA or right. And there's certainly a movement within the field to professionalize the workforce and to move towards degrees. But people are at various places, and so I think mayors are seeing themselves. It's complicated because the elephant in the room is wages and compensation, and those are big things. And so there's some cities that are offering, some scholarship. I think it's interesting, like when they offer some scholarships and some bonuses. Little, stipends to kind of help with, to keep folks in the field, because I think these are just structural, systemic challenges that we have to start facing. So I think mayors are using the city hall to convene higher ed. I know Mayor James in Kansas City, calling all the regents together and think about like these pathways for credentialing and degrees, and at least having the conversation to bring folks at higher ed to the table and to really have that important conversation. And certainly the mayor in St. Paul, we have a new young mayor in St. Paul, and certainly has been innovative in his approach to going to neighborhoods. Do you want to say, Nancy, a little bit about?
I want to bring out St. Paul. I mean, there's some other cities, and I think, unfortunately, we could be here another half an hour or more, but we're getting closer to time. And the one innovation that I want to bring out as far as welcoming families, and sometimes we use the word residents just because families are residents as well. And the mayor in St. Paul really took this to heart of having resident voice in his cabinet. Do you want to share how he did that? I'm blown away.
The going to the neighborhoods
and the interviews.
Yeah. So I mean, he actually had a parent interview, and one of our longtime colleagues. As a new mayor, he was like, I want parent voice, and I feel like I want people to feel like they're part of my administration. So he put candidates forth, and he had parents be part of the interview team. And if they did not sign off on that candidate as a authentic, like holistic, with his vision and their vision, they did not get hired, and they had to get approved. And so there were some folks that were holdovers from the previous administration that he wanted to keep, and parents did not sign off, and we lost one of our dear treasured contacts, and we were like, what? But it did not. He wanted folks to feel that the administration was reflective of them, and that they had a say in government. And so it's just, and he's done a number of just really going out in terms of budgets. And there's a couple of mayors that in terms of, these are our priorities, and this is the money that we have. We can't do it all. So what's your feedback? What's gonna stay and what's gonna go? And so we have some mayors that are really thinking strategically about parents as decision makers and co-designers of government. And so we're excited about that, and we're hoping that in this political environment where folks are energized to vote and to be engaged, that we can tap into that and really elevate parents.
Great. Thank you. This has been a wonderful conversation. It is, we talk about work and things are going, so it's great to just sit down and kind of reflect with you. But before we go on to the question and answer period, what I wanted to do is just kind of summarize it up. Like, if, the takeaways, what have we learned from cities? When you're building systems, and it's not just programs and practices, you're looking at the whole thing and how it works. What are those key systems building strategies that we should keep in mind as we work together in our communities and make improvements for our children and our futures?
Well, and it's not up here, Nancy. It's popping in my mind what I'm thinking about, but it's like you can't. It's for the greater good, and for those organizations and city leaders who can put aside their own agendas for the good, and those that are truly committed to better outcomes for families and kids and finding that common space. I think that's the key, and that's leadership, and so that's important, and certainly for the equity and families at the center, they're kind of somewhat intertwined. But I do think that as we think about building those systems, just playing better together, there is a way that you can still do your thing and be good at it, and I think that's the key. And I think I go back to Fort Worth. You should be good as an organization that you represent. You excel and be the best at that. But you can, at the same time, be part of something that's greater. And that's the collective part. And so thinking about your city, or in the city thinking about its partners and the work that they do, there is that overlap and that common space where you can put your energy together and really share and really collaborate in an authentic way that would really benefit your community. And at the end of the day, elected officials are competitive, and they want their city to be the best city. And when you can point to somebody else, and you point, and I'm telling you, that's my takeaway, go point to a neighboring city or a neighboring community and really kind of challenge them, but in a non-threatening way, because oftentimes elected officials feel like, well, if I put myself out there, I'm going to get like slammed, but in a non-threatening way, really hold their feet to the fire. And I think nothing like data and like, what's your legacy? What do you want to be known for? And I think that's the way to kind of move an agenda locally. And they do appreciate the work that community organizations are doing. But you need to help them understand what you're doing and how it impacts and ties to those big economic, public safety, infrastructure issues. And I think you'll be very successful.
Right, and be willing to stand with them.
Yeah.
I think also they can't do everything alone. And in some parts, they're looking to you to help them.
They really are, yes.
Great. Well, this has been so much fun, so I can't wait for our next webinar where we can continue the conversation. But on behalf of everyone here at National League of Cities, we thank you so much for joining, letting us be a part of this, and letting us be a part of your network. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you all so much for just taking the time to spend with us and sharing the amazing expertise that you have with us today. So I actually I know some questions are starting to come in, and one of the first questions that's come up, and for those of you who are listening in, if you haven't already added a question, feel free to take a look at your dashboard, and you can just use the submit a question, and we'll get to as many as we can. We've got about 10 minutes for questions. But one of the first questions that we have are, what types of data have been effective in making the case to a city leader, or making the case for connecting and aligning work?
I think probably one of the most, two data points I think that are very important on the education spectrum is certainly third grade reading scores and high school dropout, and being able to make the case that when we start early, we're able to kind of head off and mitigate some of the later outcomes. And when you're able to tie dollars to that, so when you're able to say, like, if we're able to get in early and the cost of remedial programs is this amount, and if we're able to get in and through developmental screenings, catch things early, it would save us this amount of money. That those are the kind of like real-time messages that resonate. And like, what does it cost in terms of the third grade reading and kids not, and there's data out there, certainly. A number of our national partners have done that, but in terms of just the cost long term, how much you're saving early on. So that's important to mayors. And if you can make that case in business folks, you're going to get some partners.
Right, like Ready Nation has the cost of about child care snafus if you're looking at access, and access to care is an issue. The other thing is we saw Austin, right? One of the best ways that they were able to address some of their access issues was they didn't just look at their city as a whole. They wanted to garner the support of each of their council members, and so they got city level data, but then they went council district data and got it specific to, here's your council, here's how it compares. There's nothing in yours. So how do we help you help your people? And so that was a way of really engaging what's relevant to me and how do you make those connections.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you. So our next question comes to us from James Madden. And the question is, are there any good models for expanding early learning facilities? Specifically, he says, we have a shortage of classrooms and centers in Washington State.
Wednesday's webinar.
Inside joke there, yeah.
So expanding access. One of the things is just understanding where the access is and where it is as comparison to where the children are and where parents would like access. Sometimes parents want access in their neighborhood. Sometimes they want it near where they work or somewhere along their commuting work. We have seen Las Vegas has repurposed city buildings that are no longer in use, and they've restructured and revived them to be early learning spaces, and then partnered with providers and Head Start providers to open those centers up to the community.
I think partnering with your schools, the schools are a critical piece to this in terms of slots and mayors that are very, your partnership between the mayor and the superintendents are very important. And where you can facilitate alignment there, that's also an important place. And we also see development, there are a number of cities where there's a lot of development and growth. We've also seen, pushes for, development agreements where a certain percentage of space will be allocated for early learning as well. But facilities is probably one of our newer bodies of work in terms of where folks are really kind of digging into. We talk about quality and access and equity. And so there is, the Bipartisan Center is launching and doing some exploratory work to really make a hard ask to Congress around facilities and some federal dollars, because this is huge. This is money. You need the money to build, and you need support to do that, and you need city managers and folks to weigh in. So I think there is a national effort to implore to Congress some studies and some dollars just around facilities, and that's really just underway this year. And I think the ask is going to be made in the next round to Congress. So something that we've seen, but it's a real equity issue. At the end of the day.
And eyes are on the state of California, whose mayor is putting in, record amounts, or governor is putting in record amounts of investments into facilities. One of the other things I'm thinking of Cleveland and Madison, where in order to develop more providers, they're working with the informal providers and helping them address things that if they want to be registered and move to a formal business, they're helping them develop that and get rid of some of the barriers, even with Madison giving some loans to home providers so that they can get credentialed. And the city sees that as an investment into getting more spaces, and not just any spaces, but high quality spaces for children, because we know it's the high quality that's important.
Wonderful. So we may have time for two more questions, and I do have at least two questions. So my next question comes from Devin Payne Sturgis, and the question, she says, they say, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned that infrastructure issues are a big concern for mayors and local government. To what extent have some of NLC's partners been working on early childhood learning or working on reducing children's exposures to environmental pollutants like air pollution and lead? These exposures can impact children's brain development.
Yeah, certainly. I think those issues, certainly the Flint issue in Flint, Michigan was probably the most notable example of the impact on young kids and families. We have a Healthy Homes initiative here at NLC where we're partnering with HUD and really thinking about housing and especially in those legacy cities, those cities that have had industries kind of move out and there's so many environmental concerns. And so we have a robust, we found that through housing, we've gotten some really interesting partners to join the effort and to think about healthy housing and using some of the federal dollars for sustainability and to really help families. And also there's, Cleveland is one of our cities that we're doing a lot of work with around infant, toddler. And so they're looking at certainly their homes and their housing authorities in terms of healthy housing as well. But certainly those are the ties. I think that's the messaging as cities are, really looking to infrastructure to kind of rebuild, bridges and keep the water clean and roads. And these things have a direct impact on the well-being of young kids and families. So when you can make those ties, and HUD has been a good partner at the federal level, but also at the state level and locally, your housing authorities to be good partners in some of this work. Not so much, Nancy, on the water folks. I think that's something, we could take a look at, but certainly those are really nice connection points to broaden your space. So I challenge you folks on the call to think about bringing some of those folks into your just planning committees. And we've got to think more creatively in terms of who's at the table and how that could help advance our work.
And there are colleagues looking at sustainability from a standpoint of environmental sustainability when there's tragic floods or different things, and how do you get a city back up to its speed and being able to even mitigate damage by being proactive. So those are areas, and that definitely helps all that are in the cities.
Wonderful. So I have a couple more questions. One looks like it might be really quick, and another one may be a little bit longer, and this may be our last question. That second one may be our last one, but this question comes to us from Ken Astrian, and hopefully I'm pronouncing your name right. But they say, who can we contact if we want to connect with your facility efforts? So is there a person within NLC if a group or a team is interested in that?
So just contact one of us.
Yeah.
Send us an email. So I'm Nancy Lim. So it's just Lim, Lim, at nlc.org. So feel free to send me an email, and I'm happy to connect you. And so here's a shameless plug. On your forum, we have a webinar opportunity that we've opened up, and next week on Wednesday, and Alameda County is going to be speaking about all the different opportunities to connect with your city planning and how using community development to create facilities for children and families. So I think that'll go a little bit more in depth, and anyone who's interested, look on the forum. There's lots of great information about that and other things that you have as connecting.
And I think on this federal effort too, I think this would be, if you're really interested, let us know, because I think you need local voices. When folks are putting asks before Congress, I think you really need to have local perspective. So if you're really seriously interested, I'd love to put forth a few folks to say, count me in, and pitch that to the Bipartisan Center to have some local voices at the table.
Awesome. Thank you. So we have one last question, and this comes to us from Katrina Brish. She says, I noticed that you are not represented in Oregon. Is there a political reason? I am a teacher in Oregon and Washington and work for a nonprofit, and on the ground floor with families who are homeless. I connect them I connect the network to wraparound services. However, it's very exhausting at times. Sometimes it seems there are a lot of services, but also many barriers to receiving those services. So I think that question is really about any particular reason you all may not have work happening in Oregon.
And that's kind of currently right now, we've made a concerted effort to really geographically look at where we are and where we're not, and understand how we can reach out to all the 19,000 cities, towns, and villages across the country. So we did some work with Portland, Oregon years ago. It's just not current work.
It was county-driven, Multnomah County, and the city of Portland came together, and they were at the early childhood table for a minute, but it has not been a place where we've had a lot of traction, which is odd. I mean, because there's some really great work underway.
But call us.
I mean, maybe
we're happy to come.
We need to put our heads together and figure out, like, maybe now is the time. I know you've got some great leadership at the municipal level, and you're doing some great work around equity. So I think it's probably just not having the right person, and we haven't been as proactive as we could be. And so just maybe circle back with us, and we put our heads together and maybe see if there's an opportunity to plant a seed for future work.
And that brings a point that if you didn't see yourself in the picture or the map, that just means we're not currently working with you, but we want to work with you. And we would love introductions, just like, come to us. And if we can help you, help us be introduced to your city leaders, and we're happy to work with them. So thank you.
Yeah, I first want to thank Nancy and Tanja for taking the time to share your expertise. I heard such great ideas, some things that really stood out around leaders who have a vision, and these idea of multi-sector partnerships, and connecting to non-traditional partners, and this idea of looking beyond the usual suspects. And that you can have champions at any entry point. So I'm so excited to continue to share your expertise with the Networks of Opportunity for Child Wellbeing. I also want to thank all of our guests who joined us, our attendees who joined us today, and for the great questions you've asked. The great thing is this is not the last time you'll be hearing from the National League of Cities. Between blog post on the Now Innovation Forum, this particular webinar, which is recorded and will be available, and we hope to also get you all on our podcast in the arena with Now. So we'll have more and more opportunities. And Nancy also shared some additional opportunities that NLC will be hosting that's available to you, and you can find that on the Now forum. So thank you all so much. I just want to remind our participants, at the end of this webinar, you'll get a brief survey, so please respond. That helps us to think about the content that we provide and how we can make each one of these webinars better. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, May 2nd, and that will be featuring Reaching Our Sisters Everywhere, or ROSE, and the Praxis Project. And then also you'll be just receiving a follow-up email that'll come to you through Constant Contact, so be sure to check your spam filters. But thank you, everyone, for a wonderful webinar, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you again to Nancy and Tanja, and Tanja, and the entire team at National League of Cities. We really appreciate your support.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody.